of Ukraine Freedom Project, Stephen Moore. Steve, thank you very much for joining us, sir. How are you?
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm obviously, in doing my show prep here, learning about your organization, 250 tons of food, medical supplies, body armor, generators, drones, and other aid. You're just not showing up with donuts, although the Red Cross does a good job at times. But the impact that your organization has, and you've been, I understand, in the country almost straight through since day 5 of this war. What prompted your involvement that quick? When you think, we've talked to a lot of analysts about this war from the very beginning, including CBS News military analysts, and the Russian soldiers were told when this war began that they should bring their dress uniforms with them because there was going to be a victory parade within a month. Hasn't exactly gone as Putin has planned, has it?
No, listen, if I can tell one thing to your listeners there in Pittsburgh, Putin is a loser. Putin has, look, as you point out, they thought this was going to be a 3-day special military operation. And that was 4 years ago. And at the time, Russia was thought to be the second most powerful military in the world. And the Ukrainians have beat them back. So, think about back in 2003, you may be old enough to remember the Iraq War. When George W. Bush went in, he went in 2003, and if he'd gone back to the American people in 2007 after 4 years in Iraq and said, we've taken 20% of Iraq and we've gotten 1.3 million casualties. Now, how would that have been greeted by the American people? Bush would have been run out of office. They would have been storming the White House. And, Putin is an autocrat, so he doesn't have to necessarily worry about that sort of thing. But, this is not a winning war for Putin. The Ukrainians right now have the ability to reach into Russia with homemade weapons and they've taken out about 40% of the Russian ability to export oil right now. They've taken out the loading docks that allow them to export oil for sale because Russia is a gas station with an army, and if you cut off their gas revenue, the army is going to wither pretty quickly. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
Very nice of you to ask whether I'm old enough to remember that war. Appreciate that. I'm 62, so I was a few years away from being drafted into the Vietnam War. So, I thank you for the compliment. I must have a young-sounding voice. When you think that old saying, if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it, you think Russia would have learned from invading Afghanistan back in, what was it, 79, 80? And that did not go too well for them either. And there was a time when Marshal Stalin would say, by whatever means necessary, and the millions upon millions of soldiers they lost in World War II, they don't seem to have changed their way of fighting a war. It's almost as if, they're not holding the line like back in the days of the Revolutionary War when soldiers would walk arm to arm with each other into a battle. But they don't seem to, as Stalin didn't, Putin doesn't seem to care much about clever strategy either, does he?
No, the Russian strategy hasn't changed in 400 years. They send humans into the war machine. They put them into the meat grinder. And, I have Ukrainian friends who at the front, many of them, and, some of them have told me that I can't kill any more Russians because sometimes what they do is they send them out with shovels to dig trenches for the people with rifles to come afterwards. And if you're Ukrainian, you've got to kill these people because if you don't, they're going to dig trenches and more people are going to come to kill you. And, I've killed so many people that I just can't do it anymore. And so that is the level of barbarity of the Russians. Putin has no value for human life. And look, we're in a global war right now. Iran and Ukraine are two fronts in the same war. China has said that by 2027 they want to be able to go into Taiwan. And North Korea is, just last week they were shooting missiles that are capable of having nuclear weapons on top of them. So we're in a very unstable world. We're in a global war right now, and And the interesting thing about Iran is that Russia is helping Iran. Iran sent, you've heard of these Shahed drones. It probably gets bandied about. You get these drones that were Iranian designed. The Russians licensed the technology and have used them to strike inside Ukraine 57,000 times. 57,000 of these Shahed Iranian-designed drones going into Ukraine to kill civilians. And they have improved them. They have made them faster, quieter, given them a longer range and given them a capability of carrying a heavier payload. And they have sent that newly modified drone back to Iran. So Iran is using those drones to kill American servicemen. And so let me repeat that. Putin is sending drones to Iran to use to kill Americans.
It's something when you think about this war and how quick they thought it would be, and of all crazy things, I was at a comedy show, and of course the Ukrainian leader was a comedian at one point, and the comic at this show I was at said, "I didn't know we were so good at this stuff." Being a comedian himself.
Exactly.
And he said, "I hope I don't get drafted in to do something like this, because let me know." He said, "Let me tell you, I'm not equipped for this sort of thing." And do you think that was almost sort of the thinking by the hawks in the Kremlin, thinking, well, we're taking on a guy who's a comedian. How's this? There's no way they're going to win this thing.
Well, the last guy that faced down the Russians successfully starred in a movie called Bedtime for Bonzo. And I'm talking about Ronald Reagan, right?
Of course, yeah.
So so it seems like the Russians have a weakness against comedians and actors. So clearly the Russians miscalculated on this, and so people ask me about corruption in Ukraine, and I'm just like, the Ukrainians for 4 years have held the second most powerful military in the world at bay. They have driven them back. They've not killed, but incurred 1.3 million Russian casualties. They've taken out 40% of the Black Sea Fleet. They have taken out 12,000 tanks. So that costs money. So, how could they do that? So how could they be spending it all on yachts and villas and still be winning, right? You have to be able, if you're doing what the Ukrainians are doing, you have to be smart and efficient with your money, because they're taking on the second most powerful military in the world, and they have no choice. The Russians invaded, so yeah.
We were talking with Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Obviously, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But further on this topic of Russia, you think that they had to turn to North Korea for help? And North Korea it's a small country, but it's a dangerous country. And I asked one of our analysts, I said, why would Russia admit publicly that they needed help from North Korea? And they said, well, I'm sure they didn't want to, the analyst said, but North Korea would have insisted on it to prove to the world how important are we as a world leader, in quotes, that Russia needs our help. When you think about that, it had to be humiliating for the Kremlin to admit we need help from another country on this war.
Oh, yeah. Or again, like the Iranian drones that I'm talking about. The Iranians sent drones to the air of the Soviet military might, to the Russians. Why do the Iranians have to send them weapons, but that's what happened. So in going back to the North Koreans, there's another reason beyond that. It's because Kim Jong-un wants to go into South Korea, and none of his military has ever fought in a war. So he sent tens of thousands of soldiers into Russia to go into Ukraine. And those soldiers a lot of them have been chewed up, but the ones that made it out, have knowledge that the United States of America does not have. So the North Koreans are now highly skilled at the new way of drone warfare. Drone warfare has changed the world. We don't have anyone in Ukraine that is learning that. There's the Americans in Ukraine are all retired military, and I talked to a lot of them. I'm actually really good friends with I was talking today to an Army Ranger, Green Beret Army Ranger, and who fought in Ukraine after retiring from the Army. And he's just like, look, I don't care if you're a Delta operator, I don't care if you're a Navy SEAL, you are not ready for the kind of war that's taking place in Ukraine. And who's ready? The Russians are ready. The Chinese are ready. They're designing drones and are getting good at drone warfare. The North Koreans, they're good at drone warfare. The Iranians clearly are good at drone warfare. They're killing our guys with drones. So America is not ready for the kind of war that's being fought in Ukraine, which is the kind of war our adversaries fight.
Right. Steve, tell us how you came about to create this Ukraine Freedom Project. One doesn't get up one morning and say, I think I'm going to move to Ukraine for the next 4 years and help the people. Again, somebody sent me an email at radiosaltzman@gmail.com saying, clarify your comments about the Red Cross. I'm like, I was just joking. Red Cross does fantastic work. That was just a little joke. Don't take it the wrong.
Let me tell you about the Red Cross. The International Committee of the Red Cross, the folks in Geneva, raised a bunch of money off of being in Ukraine, and I was at the front delivering aid. There was no Red Cross boxes at the front. Yeah. The Red Cross was sitting about an hour from the border in a place called Lviv. So, your local Red Cross may be doing really good work, but the International Committee of the Red Cross is falling really short. Yeah. So you're on target there.
How did this come about? 250 tons, not pounds, tons of food. Medical supplies, body armor, generators. I mean, you're not just in there helping civilians, you're helping the military as well.
Yeah, so we're giving non-lethal equipment to the military as well, Starlinks, generators, laptops, that sort of thing. And so, and frankly, it's because of, I went there just because I had a lot of Ukrainian friends, and I thought, like everyone else, the Russians were going to roll through in 3 weeks, and I wanted to help my friends get out. I spent nearly 2 years in Iraq at the beginning of that war. So I had the skills to help. I thought I would. And then, but what happened is that someone asked me to get medicine to Kyiv, to help with war wounded. And I was like, I don't want to go to the front. Call the Red Cross. And they're like, who? And sure enough, so I put together a truckload of medical supplies to take to the front in Kyiv when it was surrounded on 3 sides by Russians. And the international community, the UN, the Red Cross, really fell short. And so I just started saying, someone needs to do something about this, and it's going to be me. And so I started, I started bringing medicine to the front. I started, helping everywhere I could. And so, and I've stayed there. Now what we're doing primarily is, Americans, conservatives, Republicans are not getting particularly good information about what's happening in Ukraine. So we're doing a lot of that. We're trying to get firsthand experience. From what we're seeing at the front, we're trying to help Americans better understand what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah. Now, your organization is known as an NGO, a non-governmental organization. It's a non-profit. How can folks help you? Where can they go? Websites, etc.
Yeah, we're at UkraineFreedomProject.org. That's Ukraine, the country Ukraine, freedom, like what everyone in America loves, and project, because it's a project. We're trying to, Ukraine is a country that is fighting for their freedom. And unlike anything we've seen probably since, the Revolutionary War. And so, that's something I admire. Vladimir Putin's evil. The Russians are super bad people. They're killing Christians. They are kidnapping children in mass. And so the Ukraine Freedom Project is trying to help make it stop.
Yeah, there are heroes out there in the world. That term's always overused. But an organization such as yours and you putting this organization together makes you a hero in my eyes. So,
you're too kind.
Well, we really do appreciate your joining us today, Stephen, and we'd like to have you back on. And I want to thank the folks who helped put this interview together. I've been a staff for a long time. I always like to thank the staff who put things together. So I appreciate the work.
Yeah, listen, call me anytime. Would love to be with you anytime.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks so much. You have a
great day.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Stephen Moore joining us here on the WMBS Newsmakers line here on a beautiful Wednesday out there. 83 degrees right now outside our Davis & Davis Attorneys at Law Studios. 3:52 p.m. with you till 6 p.m. tonight when we go to the news, then Pirate Baseball. That first pitch is at 5:40. Again, UkraineFreedomProject.org. That interview, it's amazing at times. We had a little problem. You could hear some static when we were talking to Linda Gradstein earlier from CBS, who's in Jerusalem. Stephen Moore, that phone call was so clear you'd think he was in the next room. He's in Ukraine, and they're doing yeoman's work. UkraineFreedomProject.org. It's a nonprofit. It's not a governmental